400 guests watched in silence. Not because of the music, not because of the speeches, and not because the billionaire's daughter was sitting alone in a wheelchair. They were staring because the governor's son had just humiliated her in front of everyone, and nobody stopped him. Not her father, not the guests, not the politicians, not the celebrities. Nobody. Victoria Sterling lowered her eyes, trying not to cry, trying not to break, trying not to give them the satisfaction. Then something happened that nobody expected. A waiter set down his tray. At first, no one paid attention. Why would they? He was just staff. But instead of walking back to the kitchen, he walked straight toward Victoria. The ballroom grew quiet. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. Then he stopped beside her wheelchair, leaned down, and whispered 6 words into her ear. 6 words. The color drained from Victoria's face. For a moment, she looked like she had seen a ghost. Then she did something she hadn't done in 6 years. Something that made the entire ballroom stand up. Something so shocking that before the night was over, careers would be destroyed, secrets would be exposed, and some of the most powerful people in the state would wish they had never attended the gala. Because the waiter wasn't who they thought he was, and Victoria wasn't who they thought she was either. What happened next was supposed to be impossible. Long before the whispers, long before the wheelchair, long before 400 guests watched her humiliation in silence, Victoria Sterling was known for something completely different. She was known for her smile. The kind of smile that made strangers smile back. The kind of smile that could light up an entire room. The kind of smile her father feared he might never see again. At 22 years old, Victoria Sterling was one of the most recognizable young women in America. Not because she was famous, not because she was beautiful, and certainly not because she was the daughter of billionaire Richard Sterling. People remembered Victoria because she had something money couldn't buy. Kindness, real kindness, the kind that treated a janitor with the same respect as a CEO, the kind that remembered names, the kind that made people feel seen. And perhaps that was why what happened 6 years ago felt so unfair. Because if anyone deserved a bright future, it was Victoria. The Sterlings had everything: success, influence, wealth, power. Their estate sat on nearly 50 acres outside the city. Their company employed thousands. Their foundation helped millions. But none of those things mattered after the accident, because tragedy doesn't care how much money you have. One ordinary autumn afternoon, everything changed. The official story was simple. Victoria had been riding her favorite horse. The animal became frightened. She fell. She was injured. End of story. At least, that was the version everyone believed. The newspapers reported it. The television stations repeated it. The public accepted it. And eventually, even Victoria accepted it. Because what choice did she have? The doctors were certain. The specialists agreed. The tests confirmed it. Or so she thought. For 6 years, Victoria learned how to survive a life she never imagined living. Some days were easier. Others were not. The hardest moments weren't physical. They were social. Watching old friends move forward. Watching relationships fade. Watching people treat her differently. Not cruelly, just differently. And sometimes that hurt even more. Because pity can feel lonelier than rejection. Yet, through it all, Victoria never allowed bitterness to take root. Her father admired that. Richard Sterling often wondered where she found the strength. Because if the situation had been reversed, he wasn't sure he would have handled it half as well. That evening, Richard stood in the doorway of Victoria's room, watching his daughter prepare for the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, the same gala she had attended every year since childhood, the same gala she almost skipped this year. Richard adjusted his tie, trying to hide his emotions, failing completely. "Richard, you know," Victoria smiled while adjusting an earring. "Victoria, that tone usually means you're about to get sentimental." Richard laughed. "Richard, I was just thinking." Victoria, "Dangerous." Richard, "Very." For a moment, father and daughter smiled at each other. A rare moment of normalcy. A rare moment where the wheelchair seemed to disappear. Then Richard's expression softened. "Richard, your mother was right." Victoria, "About what?" "Richard, you still light up a room." Victoria's smile faded slightly, not because she didn't appreciate the compliment, because part of her wondered if it was still true. 6 years changes people, and not always in ways you can see. Richard crossed the room, placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Richard, ready?" Victoria looked at herself one last time in the mirror. The sapphire blue gown, the carefully styled hair, the confident smile she had practiced. Then she nodded. "Victoria, as ready as I'll ever be." 30 minutes later, their limousine pulled beneath the entrance of the Grand Regency ballroom. Camera flashes exploded. Reporters gathered. Guests turned. The Sterling family had arrived. Victoria took a deep breath. She had attended hundreds of events, yet tonight felt different, strange, as if something unseen was waiting for her, something important, something life-changing. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it. As the ballroom doors opened, the orchestra played, the crowd applauded, and hundreds of guests turned to look. Victoria smiled politely. Then something happened. Or rather, something didn't happen. Nobody approached her. Not the young businessmen. Not the socialites. Not the sons of politicians. Not the wealthy heirs. Nobody. Victoria's smile remained. But inside, she felt the familiar ache returning. The one she thought she had learned to ignore. Loneliness. What Victoria didn't know was that somewhere across that crowded ballroom, a young British waiter named Caleb Reed had already noticed her. And before the night ended, both of their lives would change forever. The first 30 minutes of the gala went exactly as Victoria expected. People smiled. People waved. People offered polite greetings. And then they moved on to someone else, to someone standing, to someone easier to talk to. Victoria had become accustomed to it over the years, not accepted it, just learned to expect it. From her position near the ballroom floor, she watched couples dance beneath the crystal chandeliers. The orchestra filled the room with elegant music. Laughter echoed from every corner. Champagne flowed. The atmosphere was perfect, at least for everyone else. Victoria glanced toward her father. Richard was surrounded by business executives and donors. Her mother was speaking with members of the foundation board. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone except her. She checked her phone. No new messages. No texts. No calls. With a quiet sigh, she slipped the phone back into her purse. Across the ballroom, someone was watching. Dylan Blackwood, the governor's son, tall, handsome, wealthy, the kind of man who never entered a room unnoticed and never left without becoming the center of attention. Dylan stood, surrounded by a group of young socialites and political donors. A champagne glass rested casually in his hand. His expensive tuxedo looked tailored to perfection, and his confidence bordered on arrogance. Victoria knew his type. Men who believed the world existed for their entertainment. Unfortunately, Dylan knew exactly who she was too. Their eyes met briefly. Victoria immediately looked away, but Dylan didn't. A slow smile formed on his face, the kind of smile that usually meant trouble. Socialite. Dylan, don't. One of the women beside him shook her head. Socialite. Leave her alone. Dylan laughed. Dylan, I'm just trying to help. Several people exchanged nervous looks, because everyone knew that was a lie. Meanwhile, Victoria tried to focus on the orchestra, tried to ignore the growing feeling that something unpleasant was coming. Then she heard laughter, not ordinary laughter. The kind directed at someone, the kind designed to embarrass. Slowly, she turned. Dylan had stepped forward. Now standing near the center of the ballroom, his voice carried effortlessly through the room. Dylan, can I ask everyone a question? Nearby conversations stopped. Guests turned, curious. Dylan, how many dances have we had tonight? A few people chuckled. No one answered. Dylan, and yet, his eyes drifted toward Victoria. Dylan, not one brave volunteer? The room immediately grew uncomfortable. Victoria felt her stomach tighten. Dylan, come on. He gestured dramatically. Dylan, 400 people. A pause. Dylan, and nobody wants to dance with the billionaire's daughter? The silence became unbearable. Some guests looked away. Others stared at the floor. Nobody knew what to do. Dylan, that's cold. A few nervous laughs emerged. Victoria felt her face burning. Dylan, maybe everyone's worried she'll reject them. More uncomfortable laughter. Dylan, or maybe. His smile widened. Dylan, they're afraid the wheelchair might lead. The laughter stopped instantly. Even the orchestra fell silent. For one horrible moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Victoria lowered her eyes, determined not to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Not in front of him. The humiliation cut deeper than she expected, because the worst part wasn't Dylan's cruelty. The worst part was the silence. 400 people, and not one person stepped forward. Not one. Dylan glanced around proudly, certain he had won, certain everyone was too afraid to challenge him. Then something unexpected happened. Near the back of the ballroom, a young British waiter stopped walking. A silver serving tray rested in his hands. For several seconds, he simply stood there, watching, thinking, deciding. One of the other waiters leaned closer. Waiter, Caleb. No response. Waiter, don't. Still, no response. Across the ballroom, Victoria wiped away a tear before anyone could see it. Or at least, before she thought anyone could see it. Because Caleb Reed had already seen, and unlike everyone else in the room, he wasn't willing to look away. Slowly, he placed the tray on a nearby table. The metallic sound echoed softly through the silence. One guest noticed, then another, then another. Heads began turning. Whispers spread. Guest, what's he doing? Another guest. Why is the waiter leaving his station? Third guest, where's he going? The answer became obvious, because Caleb had already started walking, straight toward Victoria Sterling. And for the first time all evening, the governor's son stopped smiling. The ballroom watched in disbelief. Not because Caleb Reed was running, not because he was shouting, not because he was causing a scene. Quite the opposite. He walked calmly, confidently, like a man who had already made up his mind. Each step seemed louder than the orchestra. Every eye followed him. The guests, the politicians, the donors, the celebrities. Even Governor Charles Blackwood looked up from his conversation, watching, confused, because waiters didn't do this. They served drinks. They cleared tables. They stayed invisible. They certainly didn't walk across a ballroom full of powerful people toward the billionaire's daughter. Yet Caleb kept walking. One step, then another, then another. Across the room, Victoria Sterling noticed him approaching. At first, she assumed he was bringing a drink, or perhaps delivering a message. But then, she realized something strange. He wasn't carrying anything. No tray, no glass, no menu, nothing. For the first time all evening, Victoria felt genuinely curious. Around her, whispers began spreading. Guest. Who is he? Another guest. I think he's one of the servers. Third guest. What's he doing? Fourth guest. This can't end well. The whispers grew louder, but Caleb ignored them. His focus never left Victoria. Meanwhile, Dylan Blackwood's expression darkened. The governor's son didn't like being interrupted, especially not by a waiter, especially not in front of 400 guests. Dylan, excuse me. His voice cut through the ballroom. Dylan, I think the staff entrance is in the other direction. A few guests laughed nervously. Caleb didn't even look at him. That irritated Dylan even more. Dylan, did you hear me? Still nothing. For the first time that night, someone was refusing to play by Dylan's rules, and the governor's son wasn't used to that. The ballroom became so quiet that guests could hear the orchestra's pianist nervously miss a note. Then Caleb finally reached Victoria. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room held its breath. Victoria looked up. Caleb looked down. Two strangers. Two completely different worlds. Connected by a moment nobody saw coming. Then Caleb smiled. Not a pity smile. Not an awkward smile. Not the forced smile people often gave her. A real smile. Warm. Genuine. Human. Caleb. Good evening. Victoria blinked. Victoria. Good evening. Caleb. I was wondering. The room leaned in. Caleb. Would you do me the honor of joining me for a dance? Silence. Absolute silence. Several guests looked at one another, certain they had misheard. A dance? The billionaire's daughter sat in a wheelchair. What exactly was he asking? Victoria herself looked stunned. Victoria, you want to dance with me? Caleb, I do. Victoria, why? Caleb glanced briefly around the ballroom, at the guests, at the politicians, at the people who had remained silent. Then back to Victoria. Caleb, because you're the only person in this room worth meeting. The ballroom froze. Several women covered their mouths. A few men looked embarrassed. Even Richard Sterling stared in shock. Victoria didn't know what to say. No one had spoken to her like that in years. Not as a patient. Not as a tragedy. Not as someone broken. As a person. For the first time all evening, she laughed. A genuine laugh. Soft. Unexpected. Beautiful. And suddenly, the ballroom didn't seem quite so cold. But the moment didn't last. Because while everyone else was focused on Victoria's smile, Caleb noticed something else. Something nobody else had seen. Something so small, it would have escaped almost anyone. A movement. A tiny movement. One brief movement beneath the fabric of Victoria's gown. Most people would have missed it. Caleb didn't. And in that instant, everything changed. Because what he had just seen should have been impossible for several seconds. Victoria simply stared at him, not because of what he had said, because of how he had said it. There was no pity in Caleb's voice, no awkwardness, no forced kindness, just sincerity. And after 6 years, that felt unfamiliar. Around them, the ballroom remained frozen. 400 guests watched, waiting, wondering, whispering. Victoria, you do realize I can't exactly dance the traditional way. A few guests laughed nervously. Caleb smiled. Caleb, that's all right. Victoria, is it? Caleb, I wasn't planning on being traditional. For the first time that evening, Victoria genuinely smiled. A few people nearby exchanged surprised looks, because they couldn't remember the last time they had seen her smile like that. Meanwhile, Dylan Blackwood looked increasingly annoyed. The spotlight had shifted, and Dylan hated losing attention. Dylan, is this some kind of publicity stunt? The room immediately became tense again. Dylan, because if it is, it's working. Victoria's smile faded, but Caleb remained calm. Caleb, I'm just having a conversation. Dylan, with the billionaire's daughter. Caleb, she's a person. The response landed like a punch. Several guests lowered their eyes, because deep down, they knew he was right. For years, many of them had stopped seeing Victoria as a person. Instead, they saw a tragedy, a headline, a wheelchair, anything except the woman sitting in front of them. Dylan scoffed. Dylan, you're awfully brave for a waiter. Caleb, and you're awfully rude for a governor's son. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Even Governor Charles Blackwood turned around. Nobody spoke to Dylan like that. Nobody. Yet Caleb didn't seem remotely intimidated. The governor's son opened his mouth to respond, then thought better of it. Because, for the first time all evening, the crowd wasn't on his side anymore. Slowly, he stepped back, not defeated, but no longer in control. And that bothered him more than anything. As attention drifted away from Dylan, Victoria looked back at Caleb. Victoria, you're either incredibly brave, a small smile appeared. Victoria, or completely insane. Caleb, I've been called both. Victoria laughed. The sound surprised even her. For a moment, the ballroom disappeared. The whispers disappeared. The stares disappeared. The pity disappeared. It was just two strangers talking. And somehow, that felt wonderful. Victoria. So? Caleb. So? Victoria. Do all British waiters start arguments with governors? Caleb laughed. Caleb. Only on special occasions. Their conversation continued. Effortless. Natural. As though they had known each other for years. And during that conversation, Victoria casually mentioned the accident. Not in detail. Just enough. A date. A horse. A hospital. The same story she had repeated countless times. Yet this time, something felt different. Because Caleb's expression changed. Only slightly. So slightly that nobody else noticed. But Victoria did. Victoria. What? Caleb. What? Victoria. That look. Caleb. What look? Victoria. The one you just made. For a moment, Caleb hesitated. He shouldn't say anything. He barely knew her. He could be wrong. Probably was wrong. And yet, the question refused to leave his mind. "Caleb, can I ask you something?" Victoria nodded. "Caleb, after your accident." A pause. "Caleb, did any doctor ever explain why your symptoms didn't match your injury?" Victoria blinked, confused. "Victoria, what do you mean?" The question hung in the air. Simple, ordinary, and yet somehow it felt dangerous. Because for the first time in 6 years, someone wasn't asking Victoria what happened. Someone was asking whether the official story made sense. And that question would change everything. End of section 4. Coming up in section 5, Caleb can't stop thinking about Victoria's accident. The more he remembers, the less the story makes sense. And soon, he'll notice something that should be impossible. Victoria couldn't stop thinking about Caleb's question. Not because it was offensive, not because it was rude, because nobody had ever asked it before. For 6 years, people had focused on what happened, not whether it made sense. As the orchestra resumed playing, Victoria found herself watching Caleb from across the ballroom. He had returned to work, serving drinks, clearing tables, doing exactly what a waiter was supposed to do. Yet something felt different now, because a single question had planted a seed of doubt, and doubt has a way of growing. Meanwhile, Caleb couldn't stop replaying the conversation in his mind. A horse riding accident, a spinal injury, permanent paralysis. The story sounded familiar, too familiar, because during his physical therapy studies in London, he had spent years learning how injuries affect the human body, and what Victoria described didn't fit. Not perfectly, not cleanly. Something was missing, something important. Across the ballroom, Victoria laughed politely at a donor's joke, then reached forward to accept a glass of water. A completely ordinary movement. Except Caleb noticed something. Again, a tiny movement. Small, almost invisible, but definitely there. His eyes narrowed. No, that wasn't possible. Was it? The more he thought about it, the less comfortable he became. Perhaps he was imagining things. Perhaps he wanted there to be a mystery. Yet every instinct told him otherwise. And instincts had helped him throughout his entire life, especially when something wasn't right. A few minutes later, Caleb found himself standing near one of the ballroom's side corridors, trying to clear his thoughts. Instead, he overheard a conversation, not intentionally. The voices simply carried. Guest 1. Poor girl. Guest 2. 6 years. Guest 1. And after all the specialists. Guest 2. Dr. Hensley said there was no hope. The name immediately caught Caleb's attention. Dr. Victor Hensley, one of the most respected spinal specialists in the country. Even Caleb knew the name. Every physical therapy student did. Guest 1. At least the family finally accepted it. Guest 2. I heard Richard Sterling spent millions looking for answers. The conversation faded as they walked away. But Caleb remained frozen, thinking. Because if Victor Hensley had personally handled Victoria's case, then whatever happened 6 years ago wasn't some ordinary medical story. It was one of the most heavily reviewed cases in the country, which raised an uncomfortable question. If everyone had examined the case, how could something have been missed? Unless... Caleb immediately stopped himself. No, that was ridiculous. People didn't successfully hide medical conspiracies for 6 years, did they? Across the ballroom, Victoria noticed Caleb looking in her direction again. This time she smiled. a small smile, and to her surprise, Caleb looked away first. Not because he was embarrassed, because he was thinking harder than he wanted to admit. As the evening continued, Governor Charles Blackwood arrived near the center of the ballroom, instantly attracting attention. Political donors gathered. Reporters moved closer. Photographers raised cameras. The governor shook hands, smiled, posed for photographs. Yet while everyone else watched the governor, Caleb's attention remained on Victoria. And then it happened. A moment so brief, almost nobody noticed. Victoria adjusted her position in her wheelchair. A perfectly normal movement. Except Caleb saw her left foot move. Not much, just enough. Just for a second. But it moved. His heart stopped. Because, according to everything he knew, according to everything he had been told, according to the diagnosis itself, that movement should not have happened. Caleb stared. Victoria didn't notice. Nobody noticed. Nobody except him. And in that moment, a terrifying possibility entered his mind. What if Victoria Sterling's entire life had been built around a lie? End of Section 5. Coming up in Section 6, Caleb tries to ignore what he saw, but the evidence keeps piling up. And before the night is over, he discovers the first secret that should never have existed. Caleb tried to forget what he had seen. For the next 20 minutes, he focused on work. He carried drinks, cleared tables, smiled politely at guests. But no matter what he did, his mind kept returning to the same moment. Victoria's foot. That tiny movement. The movement that shouldn't have happened. The movement he couldn't explain. And the more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable he became. Because there were only two possibilities. Either he was mistaken, or everyone else was. Neither answer made sense. As the evening continued, the ballroom slowly returned to normal. The orchestra played. Guests danced. Donors mingled. Politicians shook hands. Yet beneath the surface, something had changed. At least for Caleb. He found himself watching Victoria whenever he could. Not because he was attracted to her. Not because she was wealthy. Because he needed to know. And curiosity can be a dangerous thing, especially when powerful people are involved. A short while later, Caleb entered a private service corridor behind the ballroom. The area was quiet, away from the music, away from the guests, away from the spotlight, just staff. As he rounded a corner, voices stopped him. Two men, arguing, not loudly, but urgently, instinctively. Caleb slowed his pace. Voice 1. We agreed this would never come up again. Voice 2. I know what we agreed. The second voice sounded familiar. Very familiar. Caleb carefully moved closer, then froze. Dr. Victor Hensley, the famous spinal specialist, stood just beyond the corridor entrance. His face looked pale, anxious, nothing like the confident physician guests saw in public. Dr. Hensley, I've kept my mouth shut for 6 years. Voice 1. And you'll keep it shut a little longer. Caleb couldn't see the second speaker, only hear him. Dr. Hensley, this isn't a game anymore. Voice 1. It never was. Silence. Then Dr. Hensley lowered his voice. Dr. Hensley, she deserves the truth. Caleb's heart skipped. She? Who else could they be talking about? Voice 1. The truth would destroy people. Dr. Hensley, Maybe it should. The hallway fell silent. A second later, footsteps approached. Caleb immediately stepped back behind a service cart. The hidden conversation ended. Dr. Hensley emerged first, his expression troubled. The second man remained hidden from view. But before the door closed, Caleb caught a glimpse. A dark, tailored suit. A governor's security pin. And nothing more. The door shut. The moment was over. But Caleb's pulse was racing, because he now knew something he hadn't known before. Victoria's accident was not a closed chapter. People were still hiding something. Something important. Something powerful enough to frighten a respected doctor. Across the ballroom, Victoria sat quietly beside her parents, completely unaware that events were beginning to move around her, completely unaware that the first crack had appeared in a 6-year-old lie. And before the night ended, that crack would become impossible to ignore. Before we continue, what would you do if you discovered that someone had been hiding the truth from you for 6 years? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories of mystery, justice, and unexpected heroes. Now let's continue. End of Section 6. Coming up in Section 7, Caleb begins asking questions. A forgotten witness resurfaces. And for the first time, the official story of Victoria Sterling's accident starts to fall apart. For the first time that evening, Caleb stopped thinking like a waiter and started thinking like an investigator. The conversation he had overheard refused to leave his mind. She deserves the truth. Those 4 words echoed through his thoughts. Because people don't say things like that unless there's a lie. A big one. Back inside the ballroom, the gala continued. Nobody seemed aware that anything unusual had happened. The governor smiled for photographs. The donors made speeches. The orchestra played on. Meanwhile, Caleb couldn't stop watching Dr. Victor Hensley. The respected physician looked calm. Too calm. As though years of practice had taught him how to hide fear. But Caleb has seen it. For a brief moment in that corridor, the doctor's mask had slipped. And now Caleb knew something wasn't right. Across the ballroom, Victoria noticed him staring. Victoria, you look like you're solving a murder. Caleb blinked. Caleb, sorry. Victoria, should I be worried? A small smile appeared on her face. But Caleb didn't smile back. Not this time. Caleb. Victoria. He hesitated. Victoria. What is it? Caleb glanced toward Dr. Hensley, then back to her. Caleb. Have you ever met anyone who was there the day of the accident? The question caught her off guard. Victoria. Of course. Caleb. Besides your family. Victoria paused, thinking. Then, slowly, her expression changed. Victoria. No. The realization surprised even her. Victoria. I've never spoken to anyone else. Caleb. What about stable workers? Victoria. No. Caleb. The riding instructors? Victoria. No. Caleb. Witnesses? Victoria shook her head. And suddenly, something felt wrong. Very wrong. Because 6 years had passed. Yet somehow, every person connected to that day had disappeared from her life. Every single one. Victoria. I never thought about it before. Caleb. Maybe you should. For the first time that evening, fear entered Victoria's eyes. Not fear of Caleb. Fear of the possibility that he might be right Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the ballroom, someone else was watching. Governor Charles Blackwood. And he didn't look happy. The governor had noticed the growing conversation between Victoria and Caleb. He had noticed the way Dr. Hensley kept glancing in their direction. And he had noticed something else. Panic. Not in Victoria. In the doctor. A look that shouldn't have existed. The governor immediately crossed the room. Governor Blackwood. Victor. Dr. Hensley turned. Governor Blackwood. We need to talk. The doctor's face tightened. Dr. Hensley. Not here. Governor Blackwood. Now. They disappeared into a private lounge. And for the second time that night, Caleb noticed. He watched the door close. Then watched a member of the governor's security team move into position outside, almost as if they didn't want anyone listening. That alone would have been suspicious. But then something happened that changed everything. A woman entered the ballroom, alone, late, nervous. And the moment Dr. Hensley saw her, the color drained from his face. Caleb. Who's that? Victoria followed his gaze, then froze, because she recognized her, even after 6 years. Victoria. That's impossible. Caleb. You know her? Victoria stared, unable to look away. Victoria. Her name is Grace Monroe. A pause. Victoria. She worked at the stables. Caleb's heart began pounding. Caleb. The day of the accident? Victoria nodded. Slowly. Victoria. She disappeared right after it happened. The ballroom suddenly felt much smaller, much quieter, much more dangerous. Because after 6 years of silence, the one witness who should have been gone forever had just walked through the front door. End of Section 7. Coming up in Section 8, Grace Monroe finally speaks. A buried secret begins to surface. And Victoria learns that the official story of her accident may have been a lie from the very beginning. For several seconds, Victoria couldn't look away. Grace Monroe, the woman standing near the ballroom entrance, looked older, more tired, more cautious, but it was definitely her. The same stable employee who had been there the day everything changed. The same woman who vanished without explanation. The same woman Victoria had never seen again. Until now. Victoria. I don't understand. Caleb. Maybe she's here for a reason. Victoria's pulse quickened. Because deep down, she already knew that wasn't true. People like Grace Monroe didn't accidentally appear at events like this. Especially after 6 years. Especially tonight. Across the ballroom, Governor Charles Blackwood noticed her too. And for the first time all evening, the governor looked genuinely alarmed. Not annoyed. Not irritated. Alarmed. The reaction lasted less than a second. But Caleb saw it. And so did Dr. Victor Hensley. The doctor's face turned pale. Almost immediately, he excused himself from a conversation and began moving toward Grace. Fast. Too fast. Caleb. He's trying to reach her before someone else does. Victoria. What? Caleb. Watch. Grace had barely taken 3 steps into the ballroom when Dr. Hensley intercepted her. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but the body language told a story. Grace looked nervous. Dr. Hensley looked terrified. Victoria. They know each other. Caleb. Oh, they definitely know each other. Meanwhile, Governor Blackwood was already moving. Not toward Grace, toward his security team. Governor Blackwood, keep an eye on her. The instruction was quiet, but Caleb happened to be close enough to hear it. And that changed everything. Because powerful people don't put security on former stable workers. Not unless they're afraid of something. Or someone. Victoria's hands tightened on the armrests of her wheelchair. Victoria, what's happening? Caleb, I think we're about to find out. A few moments later, Grace looked directly across the ballroom. At Victoria, their eyes met, and immediately, Grace looked away. Not because she didn't recognize her, because she did. The expression on Grace's face wasn't surprise. It was guilt. The kind of guilt people carry for years. The kind that keeps them awake at night. The kind that follows them everywhere. Victoria, she knows something. Caleb, yes. Victoria, about my accident. Caleb didn't answer. He didn't have to. The answer was written all over Grace's face. Then something unexpected happened. Grace turned and started walking toward them. Not toward the governor. Not toward Dr. Hensley. Toward Victoria. The entire ballroom seemed to disappear. The music, the conversations, the laughter, gone. All Victoria could hear was her own heartbeat. Step by step, Grace moved closer. Dr. Hensley noticed. His eyes widened. Dr. Hensley, Grace. Too late. Governor Blackwood noticed. Too late. Dylan Blackwood noticed. Too late. Because Grace had already reached Victoria, she stopped beside the wheelchair, looked down, and for several seconds, said nothing. Victoria could barely breathe. Victoria. Grace. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Grace. I'm so sorry. The words hit Victoria like a freight train. Victoria. Sorry for what? Grace looked around the ballroom. At the governor. At the doctor. At the security guards. Then back at Victoria. Grace. You deserve the truth. Caleb's heart nearly stopped. The exact same words Dr. Hensley had spoken in the corridor. Grace. And after 6 years, her voice trembled. Grace, I can't keep this secret anymore. The ballroom fell silent because everyone knew something enormous was about to happen. And for the first time in 6 years, the truth was finally ready to speak. End of section 8. Coming up in section 9, Grace reveals what really happened on the day of the accident. The governor's family is exposed, and Victoria learns that the life she believed she understood was built on a devastating lie. The ballroom was silent. 400 guests, one confession, and a truth that had waited 6 years to be heard. Grace Monroe looked directly into Victoria's eyes. Tears streamed down her face. Grace, I've replayed that day in my head 1,000 times. Victoria could barely breathe. Victoria, what happened, Grace? The former stable worker swallowed hard. Grace, the accident wasn't supposed to happen. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Every conversation stopped. Every eye locked onto Grace. Grace, it wasn't an accident. The room froze. Richard Sterling stepped forward. Richard, what are you saying? Grace looked at him, then at Victoria. Grace, I'm saying your daughter didn't fall because of bad luck. The governor's face tightened. Dr. Hensley closed his eyes, as if he already knew what was coming. Grace, someone tampered with Apollo. Victoria's heart stopped. Apollo, her horse, the horse she had trusted since childhood. Victoria. No. Grace. I saw it. The ballroom exploded into whispers. Grace. The night before the accident. Grace. I saw someone enter the stables after everyone else had left. Richard. Who? Grace hesitated. Fear crossed her face. Years of fear. Years of silence. Then she pointed, directly across the ballroom, toward Dylan Blackwood, the governor's son. The room erupted. Dylan. That's a lie. Grace. I watched you enter Apollo's stall. Dylan. I was 16. Grace. You thought nobody saw you. Dylan. I didn't do anything. Grace. You loosened the saddle straps. The ballroom went dead silent. Victoria felt dizzy, because suddenly, the memories started coming back. The unstable saddle, the sudden shift, the violent fall, things she had dismissed for years, things she never questioned. Dylan. She's making this up. Grace. Then why did your father pay me to disappear? Another explosion of shock. Every head turned toward Governor Blackwood. For the first time in his political career, the governor looked cornered. Governor Blackwood. Be careful what you accuse people of. Grace. I'm done being careful. The ballroom erupted again. Reporters rushed closer. Phones appeared. Cameras started recording. Grace. They offered me money. Grace. A lot of money. Grace. All I had to do was leave. Victoria stared at the governor, unable to process what she was hearing. Victoria. You knew? The governor remained silent, and silence was an answer. Grace. I wanted to tell the truth. Grace. But they convinced me nobody would believe me. Grace. They convinced me I'd lose everything. Grace. And for 6 years, her voice broke. Grace. I hated myself for staying silent. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Not because of the money, not because of the politics, because 6 years had been stolen from her. 6 years. 6 birthdays. 6 Christmases. 6 years of believing fate had destroyed her future. When someone had caused it, on purpose. Caleb. Why now? Grace looked at Victoria. Grace. Because she deserved better. Then she looked toward Dr. Hensley. Grace. And because I'm not the only one who knows. Every eye turned toward the doctor. Dr. Victor Hensley stood motionless, pale, terrified, knowing the spotlight had finally reached him. And what he revealed next would shake the ballroom even more than Grace's confession. End of section 9. Coming up, in section 10, Dr. Hensley finally breaks his silence. The governor's family begins to unravel, and Victoria learns the truth about the wheelchair she was never supposed to spend 6 years in. 400 guests stared at Dr. Victor Hensley, waiting, watching. The renowned spinal specialist looked as though he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. His face was pale, his hands trembled, and for the first time in his distinguished career, he looked afraid, not of losing his reputation, of losing the truth. Governor Blackwood. Victor. The governor's voice was calm, too calm. Governor Blackwood. Be very careful. The warning hung in the air. Everyone heard it, including Dr. Hensley. For a moment, it looked like he might remain silent, like he might choose safety over honesty, like he had done for 6 years. Then he looked at Victoria, and something changed. Dr. Hensley. No. The ballroom froze. Governor Blackwood. Victor. Dr. Hensley. No. His voice grew stronger. Dr. Hensley. I'm done lying. A collective gasp swept through the room. Dr. Hensley. Grace is telling the truth. The room erupted. People stood. Phones appeared. Reporters rushed forward. Dr. Hensley. The accident was never investigated properly. Dr. Hensley. Because powerful people made sure it wasn't. Governor Blackwood's expression darkened. Governor Blackwood. That's enough. Dr. Hensley. No. The doctor turned toward Victoria. Tears filled his eyes. Dr. Hensley. I owe you the truth. Victoria couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Dr. Hensley. When you arrived at the hospital. A pause. Dr. Hensley. Your injury was serious. The room listened. Dr. Hensley. But it wasn't permanent. Silence. Absolute silence. Victoria. What? Dr. Hensley. Your recovery would have been difficult. Dr. Hensley. Long. Dr. Hensley. Painful. Dr. Hensley. But there was always hope. Victoria felt the world tilt beneath her. Victoria. No. Dr. Hensley. I'm sorry. Victoria. No. Dr. Hensley. I'm so sorry. Tears streamed down his face. Dr. Hensley. I should have fought harder. Dr. Hensley. I should have spoken sooner. Dr. Hensley. But I was pressured. Governor Blackwood. Watch your words. Dr. Hensley. You threatened me. The ballroom exploded. Dr. Hensley. You threatened my career. Dr. Hensley. My license. Dr. Hensley. My family. Dr. Hensley. And I let fear win. Victoria looked toward her father. Richard Sterling stood completely still. A man who had spent 6 years searching for answers. A man who had spent millions hoping for miracles. A man who now realized those years had been stolen. Richard. You knew? The doctor lowered his head. Dr. Hensley. Yes. Richard. For 6 years? Dr. Hensley. Yes. Richard closed his eyes. The betrayal was almost too much to bear. Nearby, Governor Blackwood realized something. The room had turned against him. The donors, the reporters, the guests, everyone. Governor Blackwood. This is absurd. No one believed him. Governor Blackwood. These accusations are outrageous. Still, no one believed him. Dylan Blackwood. Dad. For the first time all evening, Dylan looked terrified, because the protection he had relied on his entire life was collapsing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Across the ballroom, Victoria slowly looked down at her hands, then at her legs, then back at Dr. Hensley. Victoria, you're telling me. Her voice broke. Victoria, that my life didn't have to be this way? The doctor couldn't answer, because the answer was written all over his face. And in that moment, every lie finally collapsed. End of section 10. Coming up in section 11, Victoria begins a new chapter. The Blackwood dynasty falls. And 6 years after losing everything, the billionaire's daughter discovers what hope truly looks like. 3 months later, the headlines still hadn't stopped. News stations covered the scandal daily. The Blackwood political dynasty was finished. Investigations were launched. Records were subpoenaed. Careers ended. And for the first time in 6 years, nobody was talking about Victoria Sterling's wheelchair. They were talking about the truth. But But Victoria wasn't paying attention to the headlines. She was focused on something else. Hope, a word she had stopped trusting years ago. Because hope can be dangerous, especially when you've been disappointed enough times. Yet every morning, hope waited for her. In a rehabilitation center overlooking the city, a place filled with determination, patience, and possibility. The moment Dr. Hensley came forward, a team of independent specialists reviewed her case. Not because of media attention, because they wanted answers, real answers. And for the first time, they found them. The diagnosis had been wrong. Or more accurately, it had been allowed to remain wrong. Years of potential recovery had been lost, but not all of it. Some opportunities still remained. The road ahead would be difficult, painful, uncertain, but possible. And after 6 years, possible was enough. One morning, Victoria stood between parallel rehabilitation bars. Sweat covered her forehead. Her muscles trembled. Every movement demanded effort. Every inch felt impossible. Yet she refused to quit. Across the room, Richard Sterling watched silently. Beside him stood Eleanor. Neither parent spoke, because some moments are too important for words. Nearby, Caleb Reed leaned against a wall, still unable to believe how much his life had changed. A few months earlier, he had been serving drinks at a charity gala. Now he was watching history unfold. Therapist, whenever you're ready. Victoria inhaled deeply. The room became silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of the ballroom, a hopeful silence, a waiting silence. Victoria tightened her grip, focused, determined. Then she moved. One step. The room held its breath. Another step. Richard Sterling lowered his head, trying unsuccessfully to hide tears. Then a third. And suddenly, the impossible didn't seem impossible anymore. Eleanor, oh my God. Tears streamed down her face. Richard, that's my girl. Victoria laughed. A shaky laugh. An exhausted laugh. A victorious laugh. And for the first time in 6 years, it felt like her future belonged to her again. Weeks later, the Sterling Foundation hosted another gala. The same ballroom, the same chandeliers, the same stage. But this time, everything felt different. Because nobody came to talk about tragedy. They came to celebrate resilience, to celebrate courage, to celebrate truth. As guests filled the ballroom, Victoria stood near the entrance. No wheelchair, no spotlight, just Victoria, the woman she had always been. Across the room, Caleb smiled. Victoria. You know, Caleb. What? Victoria. You still haven't told me why you walked across that ballroom. Caleb laughed. Caleb. Honestly? Victoria. Honestly. Caleb. I couldn't stand watching everyone do nothing. Victoria smiled. Victoria. Good answer. Caleb. It happens to be true. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Two people from completely different worlds, connected by one decision, one moment, one act of courage. Sometimes, changing a life doesn't require power, or money, or influence. Sometimes all it takes is refusing to stay silent when everyone else does. And because one young waiter refused to look away, a lie was exposed. A family was healed. A future was restored. and the billionaire's daughter finally got her second chance. End of story.